John Sheeran, A to Z Sports, does a tremendous job covering the Cincinnati Bengals. He has been releasing player profiles. Obviously, not a lot going on here in the month of June. We did get some OTA stuff, some mandatory minicamp stuff. That was great, but it's about to get really slow here throughout the rest of the June and much of July before, obviously, training camp begins. And he's breaking down everybody on the Bengals' 90-man roster right now. And there's some guys, UDFA guys, people that maybe you haven't heard of, people that don't have a chance to make the roster. But he broke down recently some of the 6th and 7th round picks for the Cincinnati Bengals. And one of those guys is definitely going to make the roster. My gut would say 2 would probably make the roster for the Cincinnati Bengals. I would not be surprised if all 3 of these guys made the roster for the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to break down what John had to say and our thoughts on these particular players coming up. But do need to give a shout-out to our good friends over at QC Kinetix. If knee pain or shoulder pain is slowing you down, slowing down your performance, whether it be on the golf course, the pickleball court, or even in the gym, talk to the care team at QC Kinetix Cincinnati about regenerative medicine options. Learn more at QCKinetix.com or call 513-655-3356. The team over there is absolutely incredible. They have a location in Liberty Township right across from Lakota East High School. Folks, QC Kinetix bring a different approach with regenerative medicine, and you don't have to be an athlete. If you're just a weekend warrior here in Cincinnati dealing with back pain or trying to get ready for golf season, they can help. Check out the team at QC Kinetix and see what they're all about. Again, visit QCKinetix.com or call 513-655-3356. And here's the important part. Be sure to tell them that we here at Chatterbox Sports sent you. All right, let's start with a 6th-round pick. His name is Brian Parker II, selected with the number 189 pick in the 6th round of the 2026 NFL Draft by the Cincinnati Bengals. Played 4 years of college football and spent all 4 seasons at Duke. Kind of rare you see that this day and age, right? NIL portal, guys getting paid, guys bouncing around a little bit. But Brian Parker II played his high school football here in Cincinnati at St. X and was like a top 5 center in the country. Went to Duke, first year, kind of sat, didn't do much, and then was playing the tackle spots. Played a little left tackle, played a little right tackle, settled in at right tackle, and that is where he played the final 2 years of his collegiate career and really did a nice job for the Cincinnati Bengals. Beat reporters that have had boots on the ground for Cincinnati have said that he has been getting the majority of his work at guard for the Cincinnati Bengals, which is interesting, but I think a lot of us expected that when the Bengals selected him in the 6th round a couple of months ago. So came up as a center, played center in high school, was one of the best centers in the country. Played his collegiate football at Duke, played tackle there for Duke, and now early on in his career with the Cincinnati Bengals getting some reps at guard. So obviously that is very, very positive that you look at him as a guy that 100% is going to make the roster. There is not a world where Brian Parker II does not make this roster for the team, but has that versatility. I think it's huge to have that versatility with somebody in your offensive line room, right? You're going to keep 9, 10 guys on your active roster. I want one of those guys at least to be able to play all 5 of those positions. Clearly, he has done that. Did it in high school at center, tackle in college, getting the reps here at guard in the NFL. I think that is very, very positive. And I'm excited to see what Brian Parker II can do. If he can mold himself into a guy that if the you-know-what hit the fan and he had to be called into action, he had to be called into duty this year, there's reason to believe that he would have some success based on what he has been able to do in his career to this point. Also has that wrestling background. Seems like every offensive lineman the Bengals get now have that wrestling background, and that obviously is something that Scott Peters loves, right? Scott Peters is very much hand-to-hand combat kind of guy, and he has done a tremendous job since he has been here as the offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I don't think that gets discussed enough. Offensive line, it's been an issue for much of Joe Burrow's tenure. Scott Peters got that figured out down the stretch. Now, the defense was so bad, they were losing games. Burrow was hurt. They weren't getting a ton of credit for that, but that appears to be a great hire from Zach Taylor. And we talked about how those were the 2 biggest decisions Zach Taylor had made in his career to that point, picking who his offensive line coach was going to be and picking who his defensive coordinator was going to be. He hit on Scott Peters. I believe that Al Golden was a hit. I have optimism that Al Golden was a hit, but obviously that needs to be proven here in year 2 for Al Golden. But Brian Parker II played at Duke, 6th-round pick, can play across the entirety of the offensive line, 100% that he makes the roster. And you talk to people within the Bengals organization, they felt like he was a guy that should have been drafted before Cincinnati was able to take him at pick number 189. Local guy, which you don't want to fall in love with that too much necessarily, but hey, you got Brian Cook here, local guy. Got Brian Parker II here as well. You got Eric All here as well. I think just having that pride of, it's a hometown team, Cincinnati Bengals. Let's go out there and play for them, go to war for them. I think it's good to have a couple of guys like that on your roster, and that's something that specifically since Zach Taylor has been here, he's really keyed in on, right? Spends a lot of time with the Miami football program, the Cincinnati football program, programs in the area, St. X, Moeller, from a high school perspective. Having those type of guys come here and play for the Bengals, I think does a lot with the culture that you are trying to build. But one little side note on the portal, I think with offensive linemen, though, continuity is so key. And if you're just an offensive lineman bouncing around from different schools, that's going to be very difficult to get integrated into the mix with a new team, right? I think these offensive linemen max one transfer, right, for a lot of these guys to have success. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that a guy in Brian Parker II would stay throughout his 4-year tenure with Duke, because you're working to get a starting role, you're working to get into the mix, and then you kind of know what it's like to play with the guys around you on your offensive line. And maybe that in part was why he made the decision to stay at Duke. He's a roster lock, 100%. Now the 2 7th-round guys. Jack Endries, selected at number 221 in the 7th round of the NFL draft for the Cincinnati Bengals. Only 3 years in college, and his career has been pretty impressive. We talked about this when the Bengals selected him on day 3, but was a walk-on at Cal. Makes the team and legitimately plays as a walk-on true freshman at Cal. Guess who his quarterback was? Fernando Mendoza. Year 2 at Cal was like their leading receiver at that tight end position. Fernando Mendoza throwing him the football. He transfers to Texas, has a solid year. Arch Manning throwing him the football. He's now with the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow throwing them the football. So over the course of the past 4 years, he's gone Fernando Mendoza, Arch Manning, Joe Burrow. Not bad guys throwing you the pigskin. And he had a quote that got me kind of fired up on Jack Endries. This is what he said. He expected to go a lot earlier than what he went. I mean, only played 3 years of college football, and if he's making the decision to come out and go to the NFL, I think he's expecting to go a little bit higher than 221 in the NFL draft. But here's what he said. Just a lot of frustration, talking about where he was selected, because I felt like I went really late. I'm so happy for the Bengals for picking me. Every team that passed on me and took a different guy, I'm definitely going to go out there and play with a little more hatred towards them and punishment out there. So I'm just going to try and do my best to beat those teams. Nothing wrong with a little intensity. Nothing wrong with a little chip on your shoulder, right? That's the kind of moxie and energy. I think Joe Burrow was kind of alluding to this a little bit, right? Bring on the pressure. Bring on the chippiness. Bring on the, physicality and just being locked in and trying to overcome and having guys that feel like they were doubted. Having this guy in your locker room, I think, is really, really positive. Now, from a roster perspective, does he make the ball club? Are you able to stash him on the practice squad? I think absolutely he's a guy that has value being on the practice squad, and potentially going forward could be a guy that's on your team when you lose some of the guys that you currently have under contract. The 2 locks at the tight end position are Mike Gesicki and Drew Sample, right? Those guys are not going anywhere. Those guys are absolute locks. I also think Eric All Jr. is a lock, if we're being completely honest, at that tight end position as well. So the question becomes, what do the Cincinnati Bengals do at that position? Are they going to keep 5 guys? Are they going to keep 4 guys? Something they have gone back and forth on over the course of the past couple of years. Again, Gesicki and Sample, and I would even say Eric All, is a lock. The other 2 guys are Tanner Hudson and Cam Grandy. And Tanner Hudson, to me, is kind of a similar player to Endries. People would say that Endries can do blocking and catch. I think he's got a lot of work to do in the blocking department, and we know Tanner Hudson's not really doing much as a blocker, kind of just a catch guy, and he had some good moments last year for the Cincinnati Bengals. Would Endries be able to beat out Tanner Hudson? That, to me, will be a fascinating battle, and the Bengals love Cam Grandy. They love what he can do from a blocking perspective. This is a guy that's been on the practice squad, has been promoted to the active roster. You've seen him fill in as I can't remember if it was a holder or a long snapper from that emergency specialist perspective when Ryan Rico was kicking some field goals. So they like his mindset, they like his versatility, and they're not just going to give away his roster spot. So this to me feels very much like a coin flip if Endries is going to be able to make the team or not, and would the Bengals be able to stash him on the practice squad if ultimately he is not able to make the roster. But as more time goes on, I'm starting to like that pick a little bit more, and it feels like the Bengals got a lot of value there in the 7th round. Lastly, Landon Robinson, a guy that we have talked about a lot here on this show. Talked about how the Bengals kind of telegraphed that pick with Landon Robinson, right? When the Bengals were on the clock, I was actually watching, which shows I'm a bit of a sicko. Bengals making their 2nd pick in the 7th round, and I was keyed in on ESPN, ready for the news on the ticker to flash with who they were going to be selecting. You kind of just knew it was Landon Robinson, right? They had met with him multiple times. They had used a 30 visit on him. Jerry Montgomery coached him in the Shrine Bowl, Bengals defensive line coach. Spent 4 years at Navy, didn't do much his first year. 3rd year really burst on the scene. And his final year, Defensive Player of the Year in the American, and really splashed and really did a tremendous job for the midshipmen. This is a guy that if he was a couple inches taller and a few pounds heavier would be drafted a heck of a lot earlier than the 7th round. But it is just a size game for Landon Robinson. And particularly with the preseason, I'm interested to see what Landon Robinson is able to do. Obviously, you're not going to be going against studs in the preseason. But if he's able to flash, if he's able to get to the quarterback, if he's able to stop some runs at that size, you might be onto something. Because he's got the violence, he's got the physicality, he's got the right mindset. Does he have enough size to overcome some of the size that he will face in the National Football League with opposing offensive linemen? That is going to be fascinating. There's going to be an advantage, obviously, for Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson just based on where they were selected in the draft. But I absolutely believe the Bengals will be fine cutting one of those guys to make room for Landon Robinson if he ends up becoming the player over the next couple of weeks and months that they believe he can be. The same guy that had captured their attention, the same guy that they had spent a 30 visit on, the same guy that they've been singing his praises for months, even leading up to before ultimately he was selected by the Bengals in the 7th round. So I'm excited to see what Landon Robinson can do. I don't know if I can remember a 7th round pick in recent memory that I've been more excited about. It's just when you play that position, interior defensive line in the National Football League, you feel like you got to have size, right, in order to overcome. But shoot, look at Poona Ford, right? He's a great defensive tackle in the National Football League. Not exactly a massive dude. He's a massive dude for normal humans, but for defensive tackles in the National Football League, not at all. So it wouldn't surprise me if Landon Robinson can carve out a role and prove he's a really good player. But he, too, kind of feels like a 50-50, right? If he pushes Jenkins and Jackson, right, that they're not just going to give roster spots to Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, right? And there hasn't been positive buzz around either one of those guys so far this offseason. Maybe that changes in training camp, but there's been a lot of positive buzz around Landon Robinson, and don't be surprised if he makes the roster. I look at him and Endries kind of having about a 50-50 shot.